You know, when we usually think about military might or like a geographic boundary, we just picture a wall, a fortress. A physical barrier that you can walk up to, touch, and just understand perfectly.
Yeah, totally. Human psychology really craves that kind of binary, I think. We want our borders visible and our rules straightforward.
Right, because it gives us a sense of predictability. But you step into the reality of modern global conflict, and suddenly that physical wall is entirely invisible.
Oh, completely.
We are looking at a maritime landscape right now that is the absolute definition of muddy waters. So if you are joining us for this deep dive, you are likely trying to get past the endless contradictory headlines.
There are so many of them right now.
There really are, and you're probably just trying to understand exactly what is happening in the world without feeling completely overwhelmed, because our mission today is massive.
The big one.
We are unpacking the unprecedented United States naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz that officially began at 10 a.m. Eastern on Monday. And we are pulling from a huge stack of diverse sources today.
Yeah, we've got mainstream reporting from CNN and France 24.
We also have tactical breakdowns from animated military and independent political commentary from the Vaush channel. We just want to get the full picture.
Right. And the goal here is to really synthesize the underlying mechanics. We need to look at how a modern blockade actually functions and untangle the massive amount of media confusion surrounding whether this operation is failing or succeeding.
Which is a huge debate right now.
Exactly. And ultimately, we want to explain the geopolitical and economic ripple effects that are quite literally hitting your wallet as we speak.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to comprehend the global fallout, we really have to grasp the sheer historic scale of what the U.S. military just deployed.
It is historic.
Looking through the source notes, the amount of hardware sitting in the water is just staggering. I mean, the numbers point to a deployment on a scale we really haven't seen since the Cold War.
Yeah, the concentration of force is immense. The deployment centers around 2 full aircraft carrier strike groups.
Wait, 2 full groups?
2 of them. The USS Gerald R. Ford and the USS Abraham Lincoln. And flanking them is a surface fleet of roughly 60 warships.
Wow, 60.
Yeah, including guided missile cruisers, destroyers, and an undisclosed number of nuclear submarines just running silent below the surface.
That is wild.
I mean, we're talking about more concentrated firepower in a single stretch of ocean than the entire armed forces of most sovereign nations.
But the strategy, though, isn't just forming a physical wall of steel in the water. Like, the U.S. president outlined 2 specific categories of enforcement for this blockade, and the rules of engagement represent a massive paradigm shift.
They really do. So Category 1 is the traditional approach to a blockade. Absolutely no ships are allowed to enter or leave Iranian ports.
Right, just a geographic chokehold on the coastline.
Exactly. But Category 2 is the actual game changer here. Under Category 2, any vessel anywhere in international waters that has paid a cryptocurrency toll to Iran for passage through the strait
Oh, wow.
is immediately classified as a target for interdiction.
So it's like setting up a police speed trap, but instead of just stopping cars on that specific stretch of highway, you're actively hunting down drivers globally because they paid an illegal toll on an app weeks ago.
That is a great way to put it. And what's fascinating here is how Category 2 radically shifts the geographic scope of the entire operation.
It makes it global.
Exactly. It takes what historically would be a local choke point, the Strait of Hormuz, and turns it into a global dragnet. I mean, a Chinese flag tanker could be thousands of miles away approaching a port in Shanghai, right? And the U.S. Navy asserts the right to intercept it simply because it paid a digital fee to the Revolutionary Guard before leaving the Gulf. The blockade is no longer just a physical location.
It's a condition.
Right. Wherever the U.S. Navy can reach you, the blockade exists.
That presents a staggering logistical undertaking, though. Setting up a global dragnet is one thing, but looking at the tactical breakdowns, there is a hidden practical nightmare involved in actually executing the physical portion of this blockade.
Oh, the underwater threat.
Yeah. The warships might look invincible on the surface, but the real threat is completely submerged.
You cannot enforce a surface blockade if your billion-dollar destroyers are constantly at risk of being decimated from below. I mean, during the early weeks of the conflict, Iran laid hundreds of naval mines in the strait.
And adding to the complexity, Iranian forces don't even have a complete operational record of where those mines are, right? Because the deployment was so heavily rushed under pressure.
Exactly. And the ocean doesn't just sit still either.
Right. Tidal currents have physically shifted these mines miles away from their original drop points.
It's a mess.
So this entire fleet is trying to lock down a region that is essentially a massive, invisible, shifting minefield.
Which means the true foundation of this blockade isn't the destroyers or the aircraft carriers. It is a continuous 24-hour-a-day mine clearance operation.
Which sounds exhausting.
It is. Before any surface ship can move safely into a new sector, this highly orchestrated sequence has to happen. It starts with P-8 Poseidon aircraft. These are highly modified passenger jets flying grid patterns low over the water, and they drop acoustic sensor buoys to continuously map the seafloor.
I was reading about the helicopters involved in this, and the mechanics are incredible. They aren't just looking for spikes in the water like in old World War II movies.
Not at all. Modern naval mines are smart devices. They are designed to listen for the specific acoustic signature of a heavy propeller and the magnetic disruption caused by a massive steel hull.
So how do you clear them?
To counter it, the Navy uses MH-53 Sea Dragon heavy helicopters. These helicopters fly low, physically dragging massive magnetic and acoustic sleds through the water.
That is so wild.
Yeah, and these sleds emulate the exact sound and magnetic signature of a supertanker, literally tricking the smart minds into thinking a premium target is overhead, so they detonate harmlessly in empty water. And all of this is happening while autonomous underwater drones are crawling the seafloor for days at a time. It is incredibly slow, tedious, and highly dangerous work.
Okay, but once a corridor is actually cleared, that's when the maritime police work begins, right?
Right.
So in practical terms, if a drone or a plane spots a suspect tanker, a modern destroyer doesn't just pull up and fire a warning shot across the bow anymore. How does a Navy actually take physical control of a commercial ship that refuses to stop?
It revolves entirely around the Aegis combat system. Aegis essentially turns those 60 independent warships into a single, lethal hive mind.
A hive mind, okay.
Yeah, so if a P-8 aircraft or an underwater drone spots a target, every ship in the entire strike group instantly sees it, and the system automatically calculates firing solutions.
That's terrifying.
It really is. So let's say an Aegis-equipped destroyer, like the USS Frankie Peterson or the USS Michael Murphy, is tasked with the intercept.
Yeah.
They close in at combat speed, which is often over 30 knots, by the way.
Which is terrifyingly fast for a vessel of that size.
Well, absolutely. And at about 20 miles out, they issue strict radio orders to the tanker. Stop engines and prepare for boarding.
Assuming the tanker actually complies, the boarding process itself is a massive tactical operation.
Definitely. The destroyer dispatches visit, board, search, and seizure teams. They call them VBSS. These heavily armed sailors deploy in rigid-hull inflatable boats, motor across the open ocean, and literally climb the side of this massive oil tanker to take control of the bridge.
But they aren't just checking paper manifests, right? They are looking for evidence of that Category 2 violation, the illegal crypto toll.
Exactly.
Wait, how do sailors boarding a physical ship in the middle of the ocean prove a digital crypto payment was made weeks ago?
It comes down to real-time blockchain forensics. U.S. intelligence continuously tracks the public ledgers of known Iranian digital wallets.
Oh, of course, because the blockchain is public.
Right. So when the VBSS team takes the bridge, they're literally plugging into the ship's communications and computers, auditing the captain's digital wallets, and cross-referencing digital payment timestamps with the ship's port logs.
And if it matches.
If the digital footprints align, the ship is seized or forced to turn around.
See, I have to push back on this narrative of total control, though.
Okay.
If this naval dragnet is so sophisticated, with Aegis hive minds and blockchain audits on the bridge, why is there a tidal wave of media reporting claiming that ships are already slipping right past the blockade?
Yeah, that's a big question.
I mean, I am looking at headlines across the mainstream sources stating the operation is leaking or just outright failing.
Well, untangling that requires looking at a massive blind spot in the mainstream reporting that the independent political commentary actually highlights perfectly.
Okay, what is it?
The media is continuously conflating the geography of the Strait of Hormuz with the Gulf of Oman.
Ah, so the mapping is getting completely scrambled in the public consciousness.
Exactly. Ships are indeed passing through the Strait of Hormuz, but the actual physical U.S. blockade line, the destroyers and the boarding teams we just discussed,
Right.
is positioned further south in the Gulf of Oman.
Right. Which represents a massive communication breakdown from the top. The U.S. administration boldly announced they were blockading the Strait of Hormuz for political impact, I guess.
Right.
But strategically and safely, they set the net further back in deeper water. So when journalists look at commercial maritime trackers and see dots moving through the strait, They immediately publish that the blockade is a failure.
When the reality is that zero commercial ships have actually breached the physical blockade line yet. However, this media confusion is kind of a feature, not a bug, of the chaos. Take the case study of the Rich Starry highlighted in the sources.
Oh yeah, the Rich Starry is a perfect distillation of this mess.
It really is.
For those who don't know, it's a Chinese-owned tanker, fraudulently flying a flag from Malawi, and it's loaded with methanol. It was actually sanctioned back in March 2023 for its links to Iran. The tracking data shows it moving from Sharjah in the UAE, turning off its transponders to go dark just before the blockade was announced, doing a U-turn, and then suddenly making a break for it and transiting the strait.
The Rich Starry illustrates the double dilemma paralyzing the global shipping industry right now. On one side, shippers are terrified of U.S. indictments.
Naturally.
Right, so if they negotiate with Iran and pay this toll, which often masquerades as like a $150,000 to $200,000 administration fee.
Or I saw it even scales up to a flat $2 million cryptocurrency payment directly to the Revolutionary Guard.
Yeah, exactly. If they pay that, they risk losing their ship and cargo entirely to the U.S. Navy under Category 2.
But on the other side, they're sitting on millions of dollars of cargo that they desperately need to deliver to survive economically. They are paralyzed.
Completely stuck.
Usually about 130 vessels pass through that region every single day. The data points out that since late February, only 453 vessels have passed through in total. That is a jaw-dropping freeze of commerce.
It proves that uncertainty is the primary weapon in modern economic warfare. Even with the media mistakenly reporting that the blockade is leaking, the corporate risk departments of the global shipping industry aren't taking any chances.
Right, they can't afford to.
No. The flow of global commerce has essentially frozen in place while corporate boardrooms wait to see who blinks first.
And the fact that the Rich Starry felt emboldened enough to run that gap isn't just a rogue captain taking a risk either. It exposes the massive elephant in the room regarding this entire blockade.
China.
Yeah, China's absolute dependence on this oil and the glaring isolation of the United States in enforcing this.
This raises an incredibly important question about international legitimacy and really how we define coalition warfare today. Historically, when the U.S. military operates in the Middle East, it brings a massive, highly visible coalition. Desert Storm had 35 countries. The fight against ISIS had over 70.
But currently, the U.S. is doing this almost entirely alone. A coalition of 40 traditional American allies, including military heavyweights like the UK and France, looked at this blockade plan and just openly refused to join.
Yeah, they wanted no part of it.
Instead of committing warships, they are heavily favoring diplomatic pressure. They are leading a separate Franco-British initiative, hosting a conference in Paris to try and open the waterway without firing a single shot.
Because European nations rely heavily on Middle Eastern stability for immediate energy needs.
Right, they fear a total regional war much more acutely than the geographically isolated U.S. So does the lack of support from 40 allies doom this operation to fail from a lack of international legitimacy? Or does the U.S. simply have so much raw firepower sitting in the water that the diplomatic optics are irrelevant?
Well, military analysts are deeply divided on this. One camp argues that a blockade without international consensus eventually crumbles because the enforcing nation runs out of domestic political patience to act as the world's sole police force.
Makes sense.
But the opposing camp points out that from a purely kinetic standpoint, the U.S. Navy doesn't need European frigates to physically shut this strait down.
They have enough boats.
Right, the firepower is more than sufficient. Where the U.S. does desperately need cooperation, however, is managing the economic fallout with China.
Yeah, because China is the largest buyer of Iranian oil. Before this conflict, China was importing roughly 1.4 million barrels of Iranian crude every single day.
That's a massive amount of oil.
It accounts for about 13% of their total oil imports. And under Category 2 of this blockade, every single one of those Chinese tankers is now a legitimate military target for the U.S. Navy.
And China's reaction has been incredibly calculated. They haven't responded with loud, aggressive military posturing in the Pacific.
Not at all.
Instead, they are making quiet, sweeping economic preparations to buffer their domestic market. They have proactively cut refinery runs at Sinopec by 10% to stretch their existing reserves.
Wow.
They have banned fuel exports to hoard energy domestically, and they've implemented massive domestic fuel price increases.
They are essentially bracing for a long, cold economic winter. They are quietly accepting that Iranian oil is going to disappear from their supply chain for the foreseeable future, rather than risking a kinetic war over it.
And the reporting from France 24 highlights rumors of deeply classified back-channel understandings between Washington and Beijing.
Which is fascinating.
It really is. The core logic is that neither of these nuclear-armed superpowers wants a direct military confrontation over a methanol tanker.
Obviously not.
Right. So the U.S. might be strategically holding off on seizing Chinese vessels, banking on the hope that China will use its massive monopsony buying power to economically strong-arm Iran into backing down and opening the strait voluntarily.
Which brings us to the ultimate endgame. We have a historic armada sweeping for smart mines. We have global shipping paralyzed by blockchain audits. And we have secret back channels between superpowers.
It's quite the mix.
It really is. So how does the standoff actually resolve? What is the internal clock ticking down inside Iran before something breaks?
To understand the endgame, you have to look at the primary target of this entire operation. It isn't necessarily the Iranian military. It is a tiny piece of geography called Karg Island.
Okay, Karg Island.
Right. Karg Island handles 90% of all Iranian oil exports. It has the highly specialized deep-water berths necessary to load supertankers. Iran cannot simply move its oil export operations to another port overnight.
They're stuck.
Exactly. The brutality of the blockade is that the U.S. doesn't need to drop a single bomb on Karg Island to neutralize it. They just need to prevent any tankers from leaving.
Right, because a storage tank full of oil that you physically cannot sell is just a really expensive way to go bankrupt.
Exactly.
And the financial numbers are grim. The sources estimate Iran is hemorrhaging roughly $30 million a day in lost export revenue.
It's unsustainable.
They only have an estimated 60 to 90 days of hard currency reserves left to pay for essential civilian imports like food and medicine. And adding to the chaos, their senior leadership is physically scattered across the country right now in mobile convoys to avoid potential decapitation strikes.
Yeah, that makes things difficult.
You cannot efficiently run a collapsing economy or coordinate a unified military response when your government is constantly on the move and terrified of using secure communications.
So Iran is staring down a brutal binary choice here. Total internal economic collapse within 3 months, or a desperate military escalation against a U.S. surface fleet that vastly overmatches them.
It's a tough spot.
And the pressure is already forcing movement. According to New York Times reporting cited in our sources, back-channel negotiations reveal Iran offering a 5-year suspension of their nuclear program in exchange for ending the blockade.
While the U.S. is holding a hard line, demanding a 20-year suspension, so we're just waiting to see who caves.
Essentially, yes.
So what does this all mean for you, the person listening to this right now? Because it is very easy to look at this as just lines on a map or geopolitical game theory happening thousands of miles away.
Right, it feels distant.
But the reality is this standoff has directly triggered what financial analysts are calling the largest oil supply shock in recorded history.
It's huge.
When 13% of China's oil vanishes, China has to buy from somewhere else, driving up the price of every other barrel on Earth. Global oil prices have spiked above $130 a barrel.
Which hits everyone.
Exactly. If you live in the U.S., gas prices have surged 38% since this conflict began, hitting $4.13 a gallon. The standoff between a high-tech destroyer and a rusty tanker in the Gulf of Oman is being paid for directly at your local gas pump today.
Synthesizing all of this, we are really witnessing a genuinely historic deployment of force. The U.S., acting largely without its traditional allies, is using an overwhelming surface fleet and cutting-edge tech to squeeze a regime's final financial lifeline.
Squeeze it tight.
And global markets, international shipping cartels, and world leaders are all collectively holding their breath to see if Iran will quietly fold under the sheer weight of the economic pressure, or if they will choose to fire one last desperate shot into the dark.
It is a profoundly precarious moment. And it leaves me with one final thought I really want you to mull over as you go about your day. We spent a lot of time discussing how Iran was using cryptocurrency to collect these tolls. They were bypassing the traditional, heavily monitored international banking system entirely.
Yeah, completely sidestepping it.
Right. And if the blockchain allows a sanctioned nation to digitally outmaneuver the physical dominance of the U.S. Navy, collecting millions in invisible digital ether before a ship even weighs an anchor, we really have to ask, are we witnessing the end of traditional economic sanctions as a weapon of war?
That is the big question.
If any nation can just collect invisible tolls in the digital space, does a physical blockade even mean the same thing anymore? We started this deep dive talking about the comfort of physical walls versus invisible boundaries. It seems like the warships might control the physical water, but the digital ether might just be the new, completely unconquerable frontier. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Stay curious, keep questioning those headlines, and we will catch you next time.